I would like to introduce you to today's presenter, Ellen Kumar. Ms. Kumar is a solution architect with GP Strategies, where she supports a combination of sales and delivery efforts. She has served in roles ranging from account executive to operations director, project manager, and training consultant. Prior to her time with GP Strategies, she worked for University of Dayton Research Institute and GE Aircraft Engines, now GE Aerospace. She also holds an MS in Materials Science and Engineering from the University of Dayton. I have worked with Ellen for a number of years now, and I can say that you are all in very qualified hands. So without further ado, Ellen, I will go ahead and turn things over to you.
Great. Thank you, Kayla. And glad to be here today. Appreciate you all joining, and we're going to dive right into the topics on this agenda. I will just start by saying I've been thinking about how to tell this, talk about this topic in a webinar format for some time now, so it's exciting for the moment to finally be here. We're going to start with an opening poll. We'll have a closing poll at the end, but in between, we'll kind of rapidly walk you through how I create content to tell in a story format, and then we're going to share an example of something I've put together just especially for today. Alrighty then, with that, we'll move on to the first poll question so I can understand where you sit on this topic. Take a moment to answer the question, and then your responses will be tallied up for us.
Yeah, so give it about a minute. So let us know, what are the main ways that your organization are using stories? Got about 30 seconds left in the poll, so go ahead and input your answers now, and we'll continue on with the session. Ellen, what are some ways that you're seeing organizations use stories?
Actually, I see both. I would probably be answering this as C, because I see them as part of overall change and communication programs quite frequently. But they're also elements of training events, and courses that I take have recently been part of, as a participant as well as a facilitator. Even in keynotes, stories are often part of a really compelling 1 hour to 90-minute keynote speaker's presentation.
Very nice. Well, we went ahead and close the poll. There's definitely a clear outcome here, so I want to go ahead and share that with everybody.
Great. Yep, it looks like your responses are aligned with mine. Lots of different ways to usefully and cleverly inject them into events we have planned. So with that, I'm going to transition to the why, really. What are we doing today to talk to our peers, our customers, our vendors, anyone in our network through stories? Why is it relevant? When we talk about going digital, really, it seems so modern, and it seems like we're trying to get away from the old and with the new, bringing on a range of different kind of platforms that are very powerful, that can make us more competitive and more relevant, and improve our key performance indicators or measurements. In the corporate world, everyone from talent to customer service and sales to supply chain could be impacted by a digital transformation. But the key is, impacted employees are demanding from their sponsors and stakeholders, why? Why are you doing this? Why are we embarking on this journey? Tell us so we can understand why we should be committing to a change of mindset. So whether the sponsors and stakeholders choose to come up with a serious story, a humorous one, a very compelling personal one, these are all ways to connect with the enterprise and let them know why you're in for the long haul and why they should be too. I admire people who can inject humor or cleverness into stories. It's certainly an ancient pastime that's been relevant in our personal lives for some time, and I'm very interested in how people are reimagining it for business settings. So tell me, when was the last time you were asked to create a story, either in your personal or your work life? Could you envision creating one that would be effective and compelling in a digital workplace? What we're going to be talking about today are the design and performance aspects to consider here. And as an aside, before we move this slide away from this slide, has anyone heard of or been part of what are called Ignite events? They're kind of like mini TED Talks. At an Ignite event, each presenter gets 5 minutes and 20 slides to tell a story. And the slides are advanced every 15 seconds, so it's almost like a flip book. It makes for kind of a speedy micro-learning storytelling talk, and it forces speakers to distill their message into a very quick flowing story and link it to a flow of related images with fewer words, because your audience can't read many words in 15 seconds or so as the slides are there. So what's my process for crafting stories? I start with the theme, the message. What do I want to try to convey? And will my medium or delivery format be spoken, or will it be written? And if it's written, will it be punched up a few notches with graphics or slides? So the theme for the example story I'm going to tell today during the middle of this webinar will be why our digital workplace will need high-performing teams. That's my theme. And I'm going to tell it fairly simply. I'm not going to have a whiteboard artist, documenting what I do. I'm really just, I've created a few slides to go along with my narrative. My outline for the story will include some stage setting for context. I'll start with the definition of what a team is. Then I'll transition to the main part of my story and the scenario I'll be using, discussing how we collectively, with the emphasis on personal, operate within group and team environments today, and how that has either positively or negatively impacted my fictional company's bottom line. I'll cite an example from a sales organization as part of my story, and I'll kind of use that sales scenario as the one that I keep returning back to. My audience, although you are a broad audience and I don't know much about your background today, my fictional hypothetical audience for the story would be a sales team, and my tone is going to be friendly, open, and somewhat informal style. My graphics today are probably going to be more symbolic than realistic, but you could go either way. These are just some of the choices you have to think about as you craft your own stories. And lastly, rest assured, I've set aside some time prior to this webinar for designing, writing, reviewing, and practicing, and I think you all should think about that too. If you've got the story in your head and you've told it a million times before, it might be rather, if you're really just formalizing it for some new audience. But the time it takes to hone and practice will pay off when you can inject some cleverness, some humorous, some serious, some compelling moments into your story. So with that, we're going to move into my story as an example for today's talk. I want to tell my story to let my fictional audience and you know what connects us and what connects them to each other. So the name of my story, why our digital workplace will need high-performing teams. Let me start off by acknowledging my own situation. In today's workplace, there's lots of people hard at work, and most of them work in groups, but not all of them work in teams. You may have joined a professional group on LinkedIn or other social media without any expectation that you'd be a contributor to that group's success. I know I have. In the workplace, many of us belong to organizational units called teams led by team leaders that are teams in name only, but they have no common purpose or work that ties us together. Team members aren't expected nor measured by how often or how well they communicate or collaborate with one another. This was pointed to me years back by a colleague who had served in the military before transitioning into the corporate world. He wondered, where was that glue that could hold a corporate team together? In fact, team members could be more competitive than anything else. And since this scenario is quite common in sales and possibly in customer service environments, I'm going to use that sales team scenario as I tell the rest of my story. Groups versus teams. That's the theme here. How do it may be called a team, but you may see that it's operating more as a group, again, with some of those criteria I talked about on the previous slide. Before I continue, I wanted to share a bit of background that you should find helpful. In fact, you may have heard this before if you've been part of a leadership or a psychology class. A psychologist by the name of Bruce Tuckman published work more than 50 years ago regarding team development, although his term was groups, interestingly enough. And I include his concepts today because, to me, the ideas remain relevant. His work described the stages teams go through to become high-performing. They start out high in enthusiasm, but low in skill, and then they dip down, and then they slowly climb up the mountain. And he called these stages forming, storming, norming, performing. Kind of easy to remember. And then after some time, he added a fifth stage, which I didn't even picture on the slide, but it's a journeying or mourning to address when it's time for a team to disband. A bit of context for my audience. Historically, many salespeople have been advised that if they performed well individually, they would be rewarded. There are no direct incentives, often, for taking time out of their routine to help or collaborate with peers. Sales reps have their own territory and quota and keep their head down and their eyes on the prize. But, pause. High-performing teams are going to be a critical part of the digital workforce and our digital enterprise, especially here in sales, I say. Let's start with the basic definition of a team. How do I define it? And how do I envision it in the digital world? It's going to be a connected group of people who communicate and collaborate well and willingly, and who work together as a cohesive unit, not simply folks who report to the same manager or director, not those who work in silos. So I've come up with a mnemonic to remember: connection, communication, and collaboration, the 3 C's. How well, as I talk to my audience, I'm going to ask us, how well do we define our connection and what our shared connected goals are? Are they sales measurements, achievements, certain numeric goals? Are we able as a team to pledge to learn and practice two-way communication, to reach out and respond via agreed upon means and channels? And what are our preferred ways to collaborate? Since most of us are virtual, let's list the platforms we believe are most effective. And what's it mean to ourselves and our leaders to be high performing? One way to look at this is to say we're each trying to adjust our own behavior and positively influence our peers' behaviors to collectively drive up our team's peak performance level. We won't get there in silos. So the answers to the 3 C's questions will naturally evolve over time. Let's revisit them as a team on a regular basis. The digital workplace we're embarking on with our transformation is going to depend on teams working together to interpret data in order to make smarter decisions rapidly, more rapidly than ever before. We're going to be implementing a digital sales portal that will allow for new ways of collaboration and encouragement across the sales team. What will change as we implement the digital portal is that when you, the sales folks, set an opportunity to close one, it'll trigger a request for you to create and post your own win summary. In addition to doing that, which is personally satisfying, your success story or win summary will include keys to the win and a win fact sheet contributed by you. Other team members will be encouraged to review and repurpose your content, your winning approaches, and your winning ideas to achieve their own sales goals. The digital sales portal is also going to be providing you with embedded bubble help for your data entry and other forms of on-demand performance support. So rest assured, you're going to be learning from the best. The super users, the gurus, and the learning team will all be contributing information. But we're also going to look to you for user-sourced best practices. We expect to hear from the field, and you'll be notified of campaigns to seek your contribution. I'm going to leave you with a call to action. We're still 2 months away from go live, but I would like you to reach out to me, each one of you, in the next 30 days, and let me know what rewards you value, so we can roll those ideas into incentives for high performance. Now, that's the end of my example story, but not the webinar. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, I was imagining you as a fictional audience. I was a fictional leader. I was trying to create some compelling reasons for you to come on board with the transformation that I'm sponsoring and to accept that it'll be changing the way you do work. On a related note, I heard a quote from someone out, not in the workplace, but in the popular media, I guess. Meghan Markle, married to Prince Harry, was recently speaking at an event where she was celebrating the publishing of a charity cookbook. And this cookbook had been compiled by a very diverse group of people from a neighborhood in London. And her quote was, "This is more than a cookbook. The power of food is more than the meal itself. It is the story behind it. When you get to know the story of the recipe, you get to know the person behind it." And that's what we're talking about here today, to celebrate what connects us. So in a few sentences, Ms. Markle summed up what I believe is the draw of stories and what they always have been and what they still are today. We're finding what connects us and using that glue to improve how we interact with one another. That kind of improvement can happen in the workplace as well as in other circles of our lives. So to wrap up, I would ask you, are you ready to uncover your inner story? Do you have a compelling need or an audience that really would be benefiting from a story or a message you could deliver in a way that they could get on board? So understand and be ready to articulate why during your story. What's the driver for you wanting to share it? Who is the audience that you'll be addressing, and how well do you know them? Will you be like me, telling it live, or is it something you're going to record and offer up via podcast? Will it be an article or an update in a newsletter? Would you like to do something modern with it and get a whiteboard artist to come and sketch your story, and then you could share that? Those are pretty cool, and they're used in a number of different ways, and I think to use it as a story and a leave behind would be particularly compelling. So decide on your tone, decide on your style, and then own it. I didn't tell many jokes today, but some of you are fabulous at that. So take time to embed appropriate elements into the story and flesh it out. Move it from an outline to a more fully developed set of content. Work on your transitions, work on your visual appeal, either in person or in the written, delivered hard copy or e-copy that you might be sharing it in. Review it, practice it, get feedback willingly. I gladly accepted it from the people that helped me put together this webinar. And then get ready to tell your stories. If this has been a valuable experience for you, I hope my efforts will encourage you to write and tell your own tales. And now I'd like you, before we open up the floor to questions from you, please, if you will, take a minute to answer this closing poll question. What best describes your next steps?
So go ahead and take about a minute to answer this final poll question. Go ahead and read through it, answer that as quickly as we can, and then we will dive into the questions. There are definitely a few that have come in over the last 15 minutes or so, so we'll go ahead and jump right into those. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and hopefully you can see these results come in.
Yeah, oh, that's interesting. We're somewhat evenly split. And not knowing who's on the call or who will be listening to this on recorded as a recording later, it's kind of nice to know people are at different levels. It's kind of what I expected. So Kayla, I'm going to move to the question and answer slide. And if you want to offer up questions that have been submitted,
yes,
I'm happy to take them.
Yeah, we have a few that came in. Before I dive into those, though, I do want to go over a few closing notes. Obviously, we covered a lot in the last 20 minutes or so. We do encourage you to continue the conversation with Ellen beyond today's session. Ellen, if you can go ahead and flip it to that last slide, I want to make sure everyone sees your email address there. I definitely encourage you to stay in contact with her. Also, we'll be sending everybody a link to a follow-up blog post where we'll be addressing the key takeaways from today and a link to the recording. And that will be emailed to you by early next week. So there are a few questions coming in. I'll go ahead and jump into those. How long should it take to create a story?
That's a great question. Some of it depends on if you already have the idea in your head. But I would say for a verbal or written story, Depending on your comfort level, it could take anywhere between 1 and 24 hours. That's what it takes me. Sometimes we craft them together as a group, and I would say collective brains would decrease the time needed. If you're adding graphics or making it look professional somehow, I would add a few days to that. So somewhere upwards of 3 days, depending on if you're involving others to help you.
Great, and the next question is a really good one. How would you say that a story is different from giving a speech?
I think I've heard stories embedded in speeches. I mentioned keynotes before. Some of my favorite keynote speeches that are, say, not, over an hour, somewhere between 45 minutes and 90 minutes, have personal stories embedded in them. So like little vignettes, little escapes to support the theme. I tend to think of stories as having a sort of cadence to them, and that is different than a speech. I guess my personal opinion is stories are more informal. Speeches can be more not inviting dialogue either before or after the fact.
And is there an optimum length for a story? I'm sure it depends on the content and the outcomes that are desired, but do you have any input on that?
I would say somewhere between 5 and 15 minutes. We're looking at a lot of micro learning and micro stories these days, and those might be even less than 5 minutes. The example I gave today was almost right on the mark at 5, and I could have shortened it, and I could have lengthened it. So 5 to 15 is my sweet spot.
And you talked a little bit about feedback and how you got feedback even prior to this webinar, and I'm assuming that came from colleagues. Do you have any input on if feedback should come from the audience as well?
I think it would be valuable, and especially if you are a sponsor telling a story to compel others to get on board with your point of view. I think you need to invite them either in person or as a private follow-up to get to give you their feedback, to share that with you, whether it's positive, of concern, or I wish things were different kind of feedback. So I think encouraging others, even being the one who reaches out to obtain that feedback, is probably important in a corporate setting. Yes.
And I do want to be mindful of time. There are a few more questions that came in and some interest in maybe going a little bit deeper on the subject. I think that might be a good opportunity for us to include that in the blog post, but I want to be mindful that we are about 5 minutes over. So I'll go ahead and start wrapping up the webinar for right now, and I do want to say thank you to today's speaker, Ellen, and thank you to everyone who attended for your time and attention. I do hope that you'll join us again for future webinars. To register for any upcoming webinars or to download past recordings, they are all available on our website. Please visit at gpstrategies.com. And I wish everyone a wonderful and productive rest